Hello, my name is Tori Shendel Cox, and I'm the Regina G. Schrader Curator of Art at the Evansville Museum. And I'm extremely excited to introduce our guest speaker today, who's going to help us understand a little bit more about the Salvador Dali exhibition that we have on display in the main gallery by looking at one of the portfolios, the Divine Comedy. And so I'm pleased to announce my friend Barry Tork, and to give a little bit of background of who he is. He is a PhD candidate in the Department of History at York University in Toronto, Canada. He studied the history and communities of intellectuals in mid to late 15th century Rome through the stories of their friendships and exchanges. His research focuses on how wider social behaviors, rituals, and actions all affect the development and production of intellectual life. He is currently working on finishing his dissertation and teaching at Seneca College as a writing instructor. Barry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I always love a chance to talk about Dante, and this is such a wonderful opportunity. I'll probably mention this at some point during my presentation as well. It is the 700th year since the Divine Comedy was published, so there's been a lot going on. I know a bunch of universities have all these reading Dante projects. A Dante Day was declared in Italy, which is actually one of the traditional New Years in the Florentine Renaissance. It was declared as Dante Day. It's been a big deal, and I'm just glad I get to contribute even my own little thing to the 700th anniversary of the Divine Comedy.
That's so exciting.
It's wonderful. So, share screen. There we go. So my presentation today is called Understanding Medieval History and Culture in the Divine Comedy, 1320. Before I begin, I also just want to say, as a historian, I often find that the past confronts the present in basically any and every way, shape, and form. I would not have been able to do any of this work or any of my work at all. I am currently a settler on the land of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and other Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people have ran and operated and lived on this territory beforehand. I recently investigated this for another project. I live on what is known as Treaty 13 territory, a purchase made in 1805 by the British government, and there are still very, very powerful groups of Indigenous people who operate and work on the land that I am working on as well. That is where I am sitting. So, understanding medieval history and culture in the Divine Comedy. I'm going to set a picture for you. In the early 1300s, the Florentine artist Giotto di Bondone, one of the greatest artists of the time, he finished the frescoes of the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, named after the noble Italian family who actually sponsored the entire chapel itself. It's also known to us as the Arena Chapel because it was built on the site of an old Roman arena. Either name works. While the chapel itself was dedicated to the Virgin Mary, there's a beautiful statue of her in darkness over here, and it was connected to the old palace as well through a door hidden over here. The entire chapel itself has these gorgeous frescoes painted by Giotto, this side dedicated to the life of Jesus Christ, this side dedicated to the life of the Virgin Mary, and not pictured is a very powerful and massive Last Judgment that Michelangelo actually studied for to make his in the Sistine Chapel. But there's a beautiful story surrounding this chapel. It's said that the frescoing of the entire building was done. The entire thing, the purchasing, the frescoing, everything was done as an act of repentance. Because at the same time as the painting and the planning of this entire chapel, the Tuscan poet Dante Alighieri was putting the Scrovegni family into hell. Dante in the Inferno, canto number 17, wrote about moneylenders. They were, in fact, like a dog in the summertime, busy, now with his paw, now with his snout, tormented by the fleas and the flies that bite him. I carefully examined several faces among this group caught in the raining flames, and I did not know a soul. Yet I observed that around each sinner's neck lay a pouch, each of a different color, with a coat of arms, and they seemed to fix their eyes on these pouches. and one who had a blue sow, pregnant looking, stamped on the whiteness of his money bag, turned to me and asked, "What are you doing here in this pit? Get out of here. And since you are still alive, I'll tell you that my neighbor Vitaliano will come to take his seat on my left side." Funnily enough, the Scrovegni coat of arms depicts a pregnant blue sow on a white background. And when Dante described his moneylenders that he put in hell, he noted that most of them were Florentine, but there was one Paduan. It was very clear that Dante threw a particular person into hell, and it was the Scrovegni family patriarch, Reginaldo Scrovegni. As a result of this, his son, Enrico Scrovegni, who's not described in the Inferno, but he read snippets of it when it was circulating, he not only paid for the entire building of this gorgeous pink building in the middle of the slide, he also requested that the artist put him at the foot of the cross, you can see a bit of it there, offering the church itself to the Virgin Mary in an attempt for eternal salvation for him and for his family from the sin of moneylending and the hell that Dante so described. Clearly, the Divine Comedy had a pretty powerful reception in medieval and Renaissance Italy. I personally first encountered Dante's Divine Comedy on a trip to Italy, where actors and drama students in Florence would recite sections of it out loud on a busy street to anyone who would listen. Florence, ironically, loves its Dante today. While the city expelled Dante when he was alive for poor politics, they've spent the interim 600 years honoring the man, putting his words up on every corner. They have fallen in love with Dante, as so many have. While I'm not a historian of Dante the man and the author, I do study the world that he represented and put throughout his work and catered to. It's a world I've fallen in love with, but it's also a world where I recognize its transformations and its continuations from the 1300s to today. So today, I want to tell you more about the world that Dante was writing for, and the audience he was writing for, and the world that he was trying to represent in his Divine Comedy, the Christianity that he was attempting to depict, and the Christianity that 700 years later, or nearly, Salvador Dali would commemorate in these beautiful watercolors that the museum now has on display. Medieval Christianity was at the time a big umbrella blanket religion that was much less authoritarian and much more popular than many people recognize today. It was also, however, a religion that was very quickly trying to define itself in very much increasingly discriminatory ways. When Dante tried to capture this whole world in his comedy, he could very easily spend a huge chunk of time mocking popes, priests, and religious others, throwing them all into hell. His friends, his families, his rivals, he could throw them all into hell, while in the same work spend a large section describing the divine, the Trinity, all of the saints he knew as beautifully as possible, and representing this world of love. Like a medieval cathedral facade, the entire world of European Catholicism is found in Dante's Divine Comedy, both its positive and its negative traits. So today, I want to outline that world. Through using Dante's Divine Comedy and Dali's illustrations at the Evansville Museum put together by Tori, I want to show how powerful this Christianity was. And is, for Dali at least. Mm-hmm. So, when it was finished in 1320, the Divine Comedy became one of the most famous pieces of Italian literature. You can see the book itself depicted in this depiction of Dante in 1465 in the Cathedral of Florence itself. The dome is on display there. This whole fresco is in the cathedral itself. The cathedral, if anyone's been there, it's not really decorated. The dome is beautiful, there's a beautiful altar, but the walls themselves are mostly white. You're meant to look up towards this massive dome. But there is one gorgeous fresco And it is this one from 1465, depicting one of the great sons of the city who they expelled, Dante. The Divine Comedy is considered one of the greatest triumphs of medieval literature. Dante was a pharmacist, he was a politician, and he became one of the most famous poets that Renaissance Florence birthed. When the comedy was written, it was written to represent and to largely depict what the afterlife was like, how ordered and how put together it was. So Dante described himself participating in this whole afterlife as a pilgrim who would walk through the three worlds of hell, purgatory, and paradise, with the three books being divided subsequently. He descended all the way to the center of hell, where he met the devil himself, and he ascended all the way up to the peak of heaven, where he was face to face with the divine. He is led through these worlds by three guides. The first one was the ancient Roman poet Virgil, famous for the Aeneid and the Georgics. And here, at least in Dante's poem, Virgil represents the triumph and the goodness of human reason. He leads Dante through hell and purgatory, the most human of the three worlds. Dante's personal muse and his ideal love, not his real wife though, Beatrice, represents divine grace and theology, and she takes Dante from Virgil and starts leading him into heaven and describing what heaven, what divine grace and divine goodness and love can look like. Halfway through heaven, Beatrice transforms into the Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who represents mysticism and the goodness of Christianity when it worships the Virgin Mary and really emphasizes the power of the Virgin Mary and of God itself. Bernard says a prayer revealing the grace of the Virgin Mary, and then Dante is face to face with the Almighty God before the poem ends. Written in three separate books, the Inferno, the Purgatory, and the Paradise, Inferno, Purgatorio, e Paradiso, each with 34 chapters, the entire book is in a three-part rhyme, A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C. You can't do that in English, but it is beautiful in Italian.
That's right.
But that meter lasts the entire poem, emphasizing the importance of the Trinity to Christian theology, emphasizing the glory of Italian over Latin, that Italian could be a language of epic poetry as much as medieval Latin could. Dante was doing quite a bit with this poem. The Divine Comedy was meant to be understandable to everybody, to the average day urban European who read it. It's been called the great philosophy as a poem, referring to its Thomas Aquinas references throughout, but making it this completely understandable and beautiful piece of literature. Like I said, it is still read and performed aloud in Italy. You can walk up to a street corner in Florence and hear Dante ringing in your ears. And like I said at the beginning, it recently celebrated its 700th anniversary. I celebrated by picking up this particular version of it.
Can you show our viewers?
Oh yes, this is the Northwestern Press edition of the text.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes. Earlier on, I referenced that Dante's comedy is similar to a medieval cathedral in that it attempted to depict the entire world in its text. It does do that, but more precisely, the Divine Comedy and the medieval cathedral both describe how everything in creation is ordered, has a point, has an associated and relevant punishment or benefit, and how this divine universe set in motion and created by God, everything has a purpose. That is what the Divine Comedy outlined, and that is what medieval cathedral facade outlined. All of these, look at this Gothic door that comes from Notre Dame de Paris. This particular portal, I believe it's the central one, represents the Last Judgment, with Christ in the middle, surrounded by the saints, the implements of the crucifixion, and a bunch of angels, heavenly host, etc. All of these sculptures would have been known to medieval audiences. Their stories would have been known, who they were depicting, what the point was. All of these great saints, biblical figures, stories from the Bible, Christ himself, the entire story of salvation and how to access salvation was told on these doors, on the stained glass windows inside the great medieval cathedrals, all so that the lay reader, who wasn't a reader, could understand the message of salvation. Dante's poetry meant to do the same. So all the symbols, all of the characters, all of the references, all of the people, the monsters, the saints, the planets, all meant something to Dante and Dante's world. So they were all meant to be recognizable. This is why scholars like me love the comedy so much. We can argue about what Dante meant forever, but more importantly, it depicts this world that is so much more than one guy writing an epic poem. Because it's not just about the one guy. You learn about politics, you learn about religion, you learn about culture, daily life, what was expected, ritual behavior, stories of love, of betrayal, of incest, of general behavior. All of it can be found in this epic poem. Dante throws in people who are known to his audience, people like Reginaldo Scrovegni, to make the point that our sins merit divine punishment and our good deeds are rewarded in the afterlife. Imagine being a Paduan and hearing the Divine Comedy and realizing that the man you lent your house to was thrown into hell by Dante. He had a point and he would drive it home. His descriptions reflect a society much larger than the immediate people he references. He describes how the world believed it was in the 1300s. And he makes these points by making the theology of Christianity immediately applicable. Scholars have called the Divine Comedy as medieval philosophy in prose, suggesting that the ideas of the great university theologians, again, Thomas Aquinas, they're brought down to a level that's understandable. One could understand concepts like divine grace, salvation, the Holy Trinity. All of these high topics become understandable in Dante's verse. A consistent and important image in Dante's Divine Comedy is Dante as a person. He is so present as a character in the Inferno. He's not nameless. He's not a trope. He's not a stock character. The main character is Dante, and he makes it very clear that he is a specific person in a specific place and a specific time. He interacts with his guides. He describes and is scared of what he sees, or he chases what he sees, or he's repulsed by it, or in awe of it. When the Divine Comedy begins, it opens with the words, "Midway along the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, for I had wandered from the straight path." It's him. He's the main character. And he's describing it as if this incredible journey actually happened to him, and he's telling us about it. One of my personal favorites in this very personal narrative is when he's in the depths of hell, right near where he would see the devil himself, Lucifer, trapped in ice. He sees a rival, a man from Siena. Siena was the biggest rival of Florence in the Middle Ages. He sees a Sienese man who is caught in the ice on Lake Cocytus in hell. Instead of passing by him unremarked as one would pass a bush, Dante notices his rival, engages with him, and then starts kicking him in the head and punching the man and insulting him because he's a political enemy. Dante knows this man. The Divine Comedy is made incredibly personal. Dali actually depicts this moment for his illustration of Inferno 32. You can actually see him leaning down and whacking at the man who's buried in the ice. While this is an amusing story and one I actually laughed at when I was reading this guy out to my husband, this story and other moments like this led the great literary theorist Erich Auerbach to remark that the Divine Comedy showed Dante as one of the earliest European authors who embraced humanity. And not humanity as a symbol, not humanity as a trope, not humanity as a character, but the specifics of humanity. Our passions, our anger, our goodness and our badness. Dante depicts it all. He's one of the earliest to do this in European literature. So we are meant to go along with Dante. We're meant to understand him in his world. He's meant to drag us through hell, purgatory, and heaven, much like he's being guided through hell, purgatory, and heaven. This is a pilgrimage that Dali clearly felt he went on as well. The accompanying blog post that Tori wrote for the whole exhibition talks about how Dali was on this path of personal salvation. He rejected surrealism late in his life and then turned back to Catholicism. Clearly, he felt that he was going on a personal pilgrimage, imitating Dante, imitating the pilgrimage meant for all of us, really. One of the most immediate places where Dante reflected popular Christianity while addressing his world is where he throws not one, not two, but three popes into the same circle and place of hell. This is a very famous section of Dantes Inferno for anyone who studies medieval politics, and it is glorious. He threw three popes into the circle of hell, reserved for those who bought their way into political and religious positions, the simoniacs, he calls them. In Canto 19 of the Inferno, Dante describes Pope Nicholas III as being caught upside down in a hole with fire tickling along his legs to punish him for buying his way into the church. Dali depicts this canto quite metaphorically. Here he has the broken image of a woman, which represents the church, standing in front, while those who betrayed her are being whipped in the background for this betrayal. But what is notable, and again, very cool for us who study medieval politics, is that Nicholas III's speech to Dante about why he's there actually isn't done properly. Nicholas III doesn't recognize Dante. He thinks it's the next pope, Boniface VIII, who Nicholas then asks, why are you down in hell earlier than what was intended? Why are you here now? I have a few more years in this hole before I'm pushed even more into hell. And then Nicholas III continues to insult Dante, thinking it's Boniface, but then saying that the pope afterwards, Clement V, will end up in that exact same hole as well. Dante has a major point to make here. This is a very bold statement for medieval Europe. During Dante's era, there was a continual series of struggles, wars, battles, huge armies fighting over who had political authority over Europe. Was it the Holy Roman Emperors, largely German emperors, who were sitting up in Germany, looking at all of Western Europe, thinking they inherited it from Charlemagne? Or was it the popes who said that because they dictate the afterlife, they have the right to dictate this life too? The popes actually helped crown and coronate the German emperors, so they used that against the German emperors too. There was this huge feud happening between the German emperors and the popes over who had more power over this world. And what's funny is that Italy, right where Dante was the biggest battleground, because the Pope was sitting in Rome and the German emperors were sitting in Germany, and northern Italy was that battleground. So the northern Italian cities, realizing no one would come to their defense, they took sides too. This is actually the reason Florence expelled Dante as a politician. Dante took the wrong side that Florence took, so the city councilors got together, expelled him from the city, and they've been regretting it ever since. But this is the world that Dante is describing. He actually wrote a book called On Monarchy, De Monarchia, where he described the importance of the monarchy over the papacy. He was very much on the side of the emperors ruling this life and the papacy ruling the next. So for these three popes, Nicholas III, Boniface VIII, and Clement V, who claim any political authority over the German emperors, Dante described them that they bought their way into power and that the three of them will be punished forever for the sin of simony. As popes and princes fought for this authority over empire, in the world of Dante. Dante fought that war. More and more Christians like Dante, were moving away from trusting in the institutional structure of the papacy and the church. They realized that the papacy was a little bit more corrupt than they were pretending to be. So they were focusing more on inward signs of devotion and establishing their own relationship with Christianity, with the Virgin Mary. We see a lot of lay, non-elite mystics emerging around this period as well, people who made their own relationship with the divine because the institutional authorities couldn't be trusted to care. That's why Dante threw 3 popes into one of the circles of hell. It's an amazing anecdote, but what he's doing in this Divine Comedy reveals so much more about what living and believing in medieval Europe was like. Another important spot where Dante so clearly addresses medieval religious belief and its importance was not just where he outlines Christian theology directly or where he participates in political wars, but he notes the boundaries of Christianity by describing its enemies. And this is where it gets to that discriminatory point I noted in the beginning of my lecture. In Canto 28 of Inferno, as he takes us closer and closer to the center of hell, the punishments and the sins get worse and worse and worse. So in Canto 28, he describes the domain and the punishments of those that Christianity had determined were the greatest heretics of all. The first heretic that Dante describes is Muhammad, who is the prophet and the founder of Islam, who to Muslims was the final and greatest prophet in the entire Abrahamic tradition, but to Christians was regarded as a heretic. In Dante's Comedy, which was written during the age of the Crusades, keep that in mind, Christians and Muslims were actively fighting with each other. Muhammad was described as a heretic of Christianity, not a founder of a new religion, but someone who had gone the wrong way. And just like heretics sowed scandal, and tore the body politic apart, heretics would be torn apart in hell. Muhammad allegedly sowed scandal in his world, so in hell his punishment was to tear himself apart. Dante does stuff like this a lot. Many of his punishments for sin, but also the benefits for good deeds, reflect what the deed or the sin was. It's a direct relation to the crime or the good. When Dante was writing in the 1300s, Islam was a very, very powerful religion spread across the southern Mediterranean, and Christian authors like Dante repeatedly demeaned and insulted Islam in text, trying to diminish its power when it had real power in the actual world. Other religions and other people like Muslims and Jews were insulted and belittled and mocked, all to help define the boundaries of what it meant to be a good Christian. Because if you don't do what they do, you must be a good Christian. Mm-hmm. This is wrong and is still wrong. And medieval cathedrals did this too. Notre Dame de Paris, along with many, many other cathedrals across Northern Europe, famously depicted what the good church looked like, strong and proud, while depicting the synagogue as this collapsed, depressed figure, because Christianity had tried to replace Judaism. So as a way of defining what is the in-group of Christendom and what was meant in the 1300s, Dante very clearly denoted what was and was not acceptable for Christians to practice and to worship. Islam was viewed as tearing apart Christianity, and so it must be described as punished for this in hell. Like many depictions of Islam, this depiction actually tells us much more about the Christian world and the Christian beliefs at the time than it tells us any truth about what Islam is actually like. But this is another way that the Divine Comedy can reveal this fascinating world of what medieval Christianity looks like. Not just looking at what Dante describes as Christian, but what Dante describes as non-Christian. I mentioned very briefly that Dante tends to describe divine justice for sins. The punishment would fit the crime, as it were.
Mhm.
This is particularly represented by my favorite section of the Inferno, where Dante describes the Sodomites, Canto 15, chapter 15, essentially. Dante is much, much nicer to Sodomites and those that we would call gay than a lot of people believed medieval Christianity was like, because medieval Christianity did not associate identity and behavior as tightly as we do. One could do things but not be things. So his perspective of sodomy and his perspective of what we call homosexuality was viewed in a world where it wasn't as bad as it would be made out to be as Christian history developed, as European society became more and more and more clinical and governmental. Homosexuality became more and more and more persecuted. Back in Dante's day, the word for homosexual in German was Florenzer. Florence, 2/3 of its men were engaged in homosexual relationships. It was just accepted. So, in Inferno Canto 15, Dante described the punishment for the Sodomites. Sodomites were believed when they had a relationship with men, and it was only male-male relationships. That does need to be noted, that these male-male relationships were keeping them from having a family, setting down roots, and participating in the body politic as a family unit. So, because they refused to settle down, what's their punishment? Sodomites were consigned to wandering a burning desert for eternity, trying to hide from a rain of fire and the sand itself burning their feet, which I jokingly and happily described as the first Pride Parade described in literature. So, but Dante's depiction of Sodomites isn't based on who they were as gay or queer people. Rather, the sin being addressed, especially the sin in hell, this is where it gets interesting. The sin in hell is the excess of it, of doing it to excess. He threw one of his good friends, actually, his teacher, Brunetto Latini, into this canto as well. And this whole chapter has this beautiful discussion between Dante and Brunetto Latini, even though it's in hell. It's a great discussion, though. And the sin being addressed is the excess of male-male relationships. And we know this because in Purgatory, in the saved section of Dante, there is a homosexual and a heterosexual couple. It's not about the behavior itself. It's about the excess of it. Dante actually presents one of these homosexual relationships as a saved relationship, but the people who engaged in it too much, like his old teacher, no, they're thrown into hell. They're meant to walk around forever. So for Dante, it's not that homosexuality was a sin. For medieval Christianity, it wasn't that homosexuality itself was a sin. It was the overindulgence in it, because it took you away from what was right and proper, the making of a family and the settling down of property, etc., etc. So the people who indulge too much, they can go join the Pride Parade in hell. This isn't giving Dante a free pass. This isn't saying Dante was the first pro-LGBTQ author. This isn't dressing up the Divine Comedy in rainbows. I don't want to do that. That's not how it worked. But it is very interesting to note that his description of the sin of homosexuality wasn't as an identity, but it was as a behavior that took away from the family. And that's what I find. That's another thing I find so interesting about it. Turns out this amazing poem about medieval theology and salvation can tell you a lot about social behavior too. It's one of the reasons I love this book so much.
So many layers.
All right, the final canto, and I'm still in awe of the final canto. And we are moving from Inferno, which is hell. We're skipping Purgatory, and we're going straight to the very end, straight to the last chapter, where there's no conclusion to Dante. His last chapter, he meets God. And it is He's given permission to behold God and to take in what God is. And Dante reflects on what it means to look at the divine and to understand it. I put up his words, or a translated version of his words, because it's so beautiful. As the geometer who tries so hard to square the circle, but cannot discover, think as he may, the principle involved, so I did strive with this new mystery. I yearned to know how our image could fit into the circle, how it could conform, but my own wings could not take me so high. And then a great flash of understanding struck my mind, and suddenly its wish was granted. At this point, power failed high fantasy, but like a wheel in perfect balance turning, I felt my will and my desire impelled by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. And that is how the comedy ends.
Wow.
I still think this reading is one of the most beautiful depictions of God in all of literature, as Dante is trying to put into words what logic cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another part of medieval Christianity that is so fascinating to try and understand. For those who don't know, the Catholic idea of God, for Dante and for Dali, and still today, is of the Holy Trinity. God is a three-in-one God. There is the Father, the Son, and then the Holy Spirit. In Dante's time, as in now, there is a creed from the great Christian Saint Athanasius that states this quite deliberately. But what's fascinating about the Athanasian Creed, about Dante's description, about the triune God, the three-in-one God, is that you cannot break it down. You cannot logic it. There is a point where logic fails, and you just have to make that jump, a leap of faith, as it were, to try and understand God. So for Dante to describe the divine as a being that is love incarnate, but as something that is so completely beyond human understanding, is him revealing how this Trinity, how this triune God can be trusted, can be believed in, and can be witnessed, but without being overtly reasoned into existence. See how he writes that quote, I yearn to know how our image fit into that circle, how it could conform, but my own wings could not take me so high. In that simple sentence, Dante described the limits of human understanding on how one could rationalize this three yet one God. There is no way of overtly logicking it into existence because God is so much greater than the human capacity for reason. Instead, the divine, this Trinity, must simply be witnessed, believed in, trusted, and embraced just as it embraced us. The whole description of God here is much longer. It takes up a large part of the chapter. I just couldn't fit it all on the slide. And it's much, much more beautiful than the simple description reveals. I went for this description because of that whole logical imbalance. The description earlier than this one actually talks much more, much more about love and what he actually is witnessing when he looks at this loving figure. But it is a beautiful end to this epic poem. And this end reveals much more than the simple mythological description of what the afterlife was like. The entire poem is more than this simple mythological description of what the afterlife was like. To Dante, he was outlining this pilgrimage into what it was and what it represented. And in many ways, he was describing the afterlife that many, many medieval Christians believed in. While it was mostly read, mostly understood as this great piece of Italian literature, it's how it's still taught today. Dante's Divine Comedy is so much more than that. Written in Italian, meant to be understood and read and heard by the regular European especially the urban ones, and it was meant to reflect many wider behaviors, beliefs, and cultures. The Divine Comedy and its representations, especially by Dali, through the centuries, tell us so much about the culture and the belief of those who created these items. Dante was writing poetry. There's no way around that. This is a beautiful, epic poem. He is an epic author for doing this epic work. He wrote a lot of other stuff. He wrote a whole book about his love for Beatrice. He wrote another whole book on monarchy. He wrote another book on the eloquence of the vulgar, in this case, Italian language. He was an author, but he was writing, especially the Divine Comedy, he was writing this to be understood by a wider audience, not just for his own glory. His depiction of Christianity and its afterlife, the noting and depictions of who was saved and why they were saved, and how the divine was believed to be clearly resonated. All of this stuff clearly resonated for its readers. It's why it became so popular. The Divine Comedy reveals so much of what medieval Catholics believed in and how they believed the world should be and was ordered. Purgatory had these 7 planes. In hell itself resulted in going to the deep root of hell itself, where the devil was frozen there. And heaven was divinely ordered, all the planets and saints and angels in their right and correct place. Like a great Gothic cathedral, the Divine Comedy represents for its viewers and readers, it represents this ordered universe where everything had a place inside and outside the traditional Catholic structure. In doing this, Dante not just described medieval Catholicism, he reproduced it. He made it much more obvious and much more ordered for the worshippers who he knew and who he lived with. This comedy was meant to be divine, and that is why we love it so much.
Wow.
All of my translations came from this version. It's not this one. It's the Divine Comedy, the Penguin Classics version. It's the most accessible. It's the first copy of Dante I actually taught with. He has a portable Dante that has selections from other books as well, but these 3 are the big ones I taught with. That they were the first ones I read. Mine are torn apart at this point. Huge thank you to Tori Shendel Cox. Thank you to you. Thank you to the Evansville Museum for their work. The exhibit looks phenomenal. Please go support museums. They're amazing. And this particular, honestly, I'm not a scholar of Dante. I'm not really a scholar of the Divine Comedy. When I was told that Dali did these gorgeous watercolors, I spent hours looking at them. They are beautiful. Go see them. And the Divine Comedy is only half of them. There's that cats exhibit too. So go see those too.
That's right.
Go see those too. Important acknowledgements. Christine Zappella is an art historian at the University of Chicago. She helped me a lot. She's currently wrestling with very important ideas on Dante and how he describes light for one of her book chapters. Angela Zhang is with me at York University. She is a scholar of Florence in the 1300s and 1400s. She helped me a lot with all of this discussion of how Florence lived and worked, who was included, who wasn't included. So she's a wonderful, wonderful scholar too. Dr. Natale Vacalebre at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a Dante specialist. That is what he does. He looks at the book history of Dante, how and where Dante was printed, why Dante was printed, and where Dante was censored. Turns out that Pope's bit got censored really quickly. He's a brilliant, brilliant scholar. All of these people should be followed. I stand on the shoulders of giants. That is where I come from. So thank you again so much, Tori. This is
thank you so much. This is amazing. Like, your energy and your passion still shines through, even though we're on a virtual platform.
Oh yeah, that thing.
So really, thank you so much. And Cash has just plucked the strings of my heart. I studied abroad in Florence in 2013, spent the year there. So I could definitely attest to people standing on the street corners, bellowing the fine words of Dante. Bless it.
My favorite is when on the palaces of a lot of the noble houses, they actually have Dante's words about that noble family on the palace. And I'm like, some of those words aren't the nicest guy.
Yes. But no Dante.
You sure you want to do that?
Mhm.
But Florence has a huge love affair with Dante at this point. And Dante had a huge love affair with Florence. I mean, he insulted it all throughout his Divine Comedy, but that's because he was expelled. He loved that city.
Well, Barry, keep in touch, and thank you so much for this opportunity and sharing your expertise with our viewers.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure. And I hope everyone enjoys the exhibition.
Yes.
Go see it. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Okay.